Stephanie Brobbey practiced as a private wealth lawyer for over a decade, helping the super rich keep more of their money.
Advising people on setting up structures that would help to perpetuate kind of wealth accumulation, would help them transfer assets to the next generation. And
So in layman's terms, you are helping rich people keep their money?
Essentially, yes.
Everything changed at a party.
I'm at this party and a friend of mine walks in. He says the three most harmful addictions in life are heroin, carbohydrates, and a monthly paycheck.
She is now on a mission to help the super rich give up more of their money.
Goodness, it's the same people that own everything. Literally everything, you know.
I want more than just a piece. Wanna be heard from the west to the east. I worked in my craft and I prayed for my time on the scene. The man have never left my team. 19, learned the right creed. Nah, I'm not a right breed, but I might be. In my crease, 9 kids, hit up my G. I'll still never sell out my theme. Well, you know about heritage, you go inherited. Don't chill with the snakes, but the flow's still venomous. Perspective is everything. So much lemonade, I don't know what a lemon is.
Stephanie, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
It's been a long time coming. We've been trying to get this going since last year.
Last year, yeah.
No?
Yeah, no,
last year?
Yeah, it hasn't been a full year, but it
Yeah.
was in the last year.
This is true. It was in the last calendar year.
Yeah.
You are in many ways my sort of perfect podcast guest.
Oh, okay.
Because the world you work in, live in, move in, it's a world that a lot of people know nothing about.
Yeah.
But I'm convinced at the end of watching this or listening to this, folks would be like, oh my, what? This exists?
Yeah.
It's one of those, like, they live among us. You know, there's these people that kind of like, you know, are doing really cool things that people just don't know about. You're one of the guests who I think it would be really interesting. I think we'll find out a lot about you from working out your transition and how you actually got into this work. So we've watched the video. We know a bit about kind of what you do, but exactly how did you get into it? And yeah, what are some of the lessons we can learn from that?
Yeah, it's always really interesting for me retelling the story of how I came into this work, because it really reaffirms, you know, everything that I'm doing, but it also kind of makes me realize how crazy a transition it has been, you know, over the last few years. So essentially I started out in life wanting to become a human rights lawyer quite early on. So like when I was 16, was always having, you know, getting into arguments with people, teachers, my parents. And was just really kind of captivated by the pursuit of justice. And so I set out to be a human rights lawyer. I studied law, and I ended up completing my degree, and I basically finished university and then ended up being offered a training contract at a firm in the city. And it was just an incredible opportunity. So I kind of, I got diverted essentially into the city and didn't end up pursuing human rights, although I did have some experience of it. So I ended up going to law school and training to become a solicitor at this firm in the city. And I ended up qualifying into private wealth, into private client law. And this was a surprise to me because I grew up in a working class community. My parents are Ghanaian migrants. You know, I had that a really classic kind of West African migrant story, kind of coming of age, entry into the world in London. And I didn't have proximity to wealth, you know, in my own life. You know, I was surrounded by kind of neighbours on my street who had access to wealth when I moved when I was about 12. But other than that, I had no kind of meaningful connection to wealth. And so it was a surprise to me that I ended up qualifying into this area that was essentially exclusively about advising people on setting up structures that would help to perpetuate kind of wealth accumulation, would help them transfer assets to the next generation. And
So in layman's terms, you are helping rich people keep their money.
Essentially, yes.
And not give it away, essentially.
Yeah, I was really exclusively concerned with supporting the preservation and accumulation of wealth
Gotcha.
for a certain demographic, you know, a certain group of people in society. And I guess what ended up happening was this sort of decade-long education in kind of capital in the 21st century. I quickly began to realize, oh my goodness, it's the same people that own everything. Literally everything. You know, I had, you know, before I became a private wealth lawyer, I'd never thought about who owned a shopping mall when I was in a shopping mall, or who, you know, I'd never really thought about ownership. Maybe, you know, in the context of home ownership, because it was always an aspiration of mine, because I'd experienced what it had been like to, you know, live in social housing and to feel the strain of like inadequate housing. And, you know, I had experienced renting and the difficulties of the private, you know, rental sector, but I didn't really think more broadly about corporate ownership and, you know, thinking more broadly about land and real estate and, I don't know, intellectual property and all the, you know, the different ways that the law is set up to govern ownership and who owns these assets.
Tell me a bit about some of the stuff you learned about ownership, because people who are listening to this would have heard me talk about the mainstream media ad nauseum, the idea that the media system in the UK, there's really only about 4 middle-aged white men that basically control something like 74% of whether it's newspaper distribution, whether it's some of the broadcast channels. Like, it's the concentration is pretty wild when it comes to the mainstream media. What are some of the stuff you saw, you know, vis-a-vis ownership that made you go, hold on a minute?
Well, I guess I started to see a pattern of, you know, I described, you know, this thought that came to my head that, oh my goodness, it's the same people that own everything or have influence over everything, because I started to see that it was the same actors and their, you know, family members and their peers, you know, direct peers that maybe they went to university with, or, you know, their parents know each other. There's this kind of circulation of many forms of capital, so, you know, financial capital, but also social capital, who owned, you know, had substantial property holdings, residential property holdings and commercial real estate holdings. But those same people would also be on the boards of, you know, listed companies and as well as private companies. They'd also be on the boards of various charities. And so there's this common thread that runs through ownership and influence in our society. And it's, you know, it's the same types of people that have control over, you know, whether it's narrative, over the flow of resources, over the flow of capital, and over ownership structures. And then, you know, we think about the judiciary and we think about who makes our laws, and, you know, it's the same kinds of people. And so I started to, I guess it was, you know, I started to build a picture of the system. And who is in that system and who is excluded from it.
So you're in the system, you're making waves, they're promoting you, you know, Stephanie, you're so great. And then what happens?
Yeah, so I'm deep in the belly of the beast, and, you know, I worked really hard, you know, like my parents gave me this really strong work ethic, and I was, yeah, of course. And I was naturally academic. And so, you know, I was, you know, really driven to just excel at the work that I did, you know, whether I was at law school or, you know, in private practice. I was really excited about kind of developing my own practice as a private wealth lawyer. I really wanted to end up kind of exclusively working with philanthropists or, you know, individuals that were pursuing impact investing and, you know, anything that was to do with using capital for good in the world. That, you know, I was kind of addicted to, and I really, really wanted to get in the mix of that. But I started essentially, you know, I qualified in 2011, which was a year after the coalition government came into power. And I can only, you know, I realize this now looking backwards. I didn't realize at the time that I was gradually becoming really politicized around my work. Because I was at the same, there was this parallel process, I suppose, where I I was developing an understanding of the system, our systems of economy and governance, and who's in and who's out of those systems. And, I was also becoming aware of this rhetoric that was being propagated by the industry that I was in. Obviously I worked for a law firm, but as a private wealth lawyer, I sat within an industry of individuals, professionals that comprise tax advisors, accountants, private bankers, investment managers, all sorts of people that were exclusively concerned with perpetuating, the system of private wealth, which helps people to preserve and accumulate wealth. And I started to become really troubled by these narratives around the kind of threat of taxes going up and what this meant for the clients that we were servicing. And, because to my mind, I thought, well, these people can actually afford to pay more taxes, right? And generally you're paying tax when you've gained something. Yeah. So I couldn't really see what the issue was. And it's really started to grate on me. But at the same time, I was providing all this advice which was helping people to minimize taxes because, that was what I was trained to do. And that, that was always it was almost like the mark of, delivering value to a client is like, how much tax can you help them save, or how many tax savings can you identify in any given transaction or situation? So we had these election cycles and I was, each time there was this kind of threat of a Labour government coming into force and raising taxes. And I started to really, become quite agitated, around the idea of fairness. And, at the same time I was volunteering for various non-profits. I sat on a couple of boards. I was part of the Funding Network, which is a philanthropic community that kind of hosts live crowdfunding events for non-profits that are facilitating social change. And I started to realize that I was really out of sync with my own values.
That's so fascinating.
Yeah.
So you've been studying, working, so you qualified, now you're working, and you're doing very, very well.
Yeah.
You're almost hating what you do.
I wasn't hating it. I was becoming more uncomfortable with it. I think it was once I had I was on my own personal trajectory of trying to achieve my own economic stability, and I think once I reached a certain level, I had more breathing space to actually reflect on my work and the purpose and meaning behind it. And I've always been someone that was driven by the idea of purpose and what, I always had a sort of vocational approach to my work. So I wasn't just satisfied by the idea of like making partner, at a certain age, although, obviously that's very exciting. And I was recognized in the industry. I had lots of accolades, which was, great to have that recognition. But at the end of the day, I knew that the only thing that was going to satisfy me was walking fully in the purpose that I felt that I'd been called to, if you will. So I kind of began this sort of aggressive soul searching journey, which involved, a bit of coaching, but just really interrogating, like, what are my values and what do those values mean for the work that I do? And I started to reconnect with the values that I grew up with, with my mum talking to me about the system when I was very young and talking to me about...
What kind of stuff would she say?
Well, I never used to understand what she meant when she when she spoke about the system. Mm-hmm. It sounded really dramatic to me, but in retrospect, she was talking about like the society that we live in and the social protections that we have and our economic system, our political system. And she talked to me about the importance of paying your taxes fully and participating in society. My mum was definitely known to kind of hold local councillors to account. When, people would come canvassing from the Labour Party, she'd really give them a run for their money.
I love this. Aunties, they're like giving them
honestly.
How will you make sure
she really,
I love it.
Really grilled them. And, at the time, when you're young, you're like a little bit embarrassed and, think, oh, why is she doing this? But wow, I look back and I think, wow, I feel really proud of her because, she just said what she thought, and she realised that she had a weapon as a British citizen, as a person that lived here and contributed here, to hold the state to account.
Yeah.
And I think that's so powerful, because there's so much hopelessness in society at the moment around, our political system. Of course, it is really dispiriting to see what is happening at the moment. But even my mum, and this would have been in the 90s, where, we had recession. I think it would have been around John Major. There were a lot of challenges, but she held on. She took hold of the weapon that she had, which was to stand in citizenship in an active way, with this active posture, and to interrogate and to challenge, but also to hold herself to a standard of, paying her taxes properly and talking to us about that. So that really, I don't know what it was that reconnected me with that. And I just had this awakening that, I am in the wrong job, I'm directly opposed to the values that were instilled in me from a young age. And, the values that I hold about wanting to live in a fair society.
So this is really interesting to me, because I know people listening or watching may have had that exact same epiphany, if you will, where they come to terms with the fact that, okay, I am not where I need to be. Did you sit with that? Was it just like a thought at lunch? Or,
Oh yeah, I sat deep in all of that. And the thing is, from my experience of this, was that when this realization happened, I started to panic, because I thought, what agency do I have to, what do I do with this? Because I'm on a really great trajectory, and maybe I make partner and I, somehow try and influence from that position. But I just realized that, I had some coaching, and, I spent a lot of time kind of leaving London at the weekends and going to the coast so that I could find stillness and actually, hear myself think and start to ideate, on my own, and think about how it was that I could use my skills to, create something that I believed was more productive in the world, that was more, enable me to be more in alignment with my values, but that would also kind of repurpose the skills and experience and the tools that I'd learned over the, preceding decade.
Wow.
And that took time. And I think it's really important for people to recognize that, because I think a lot of people, as soon as they realize, oh, okay, I'm out of alignment, or I have an idea, right, I'm going to jump now. And actually, I would caution, everyone's journey is different, but I would caution against that, because I think that there's something magical that happens when you sit in the discomfort and the tension of realizing where you are, and to create something. There's a creativity that you can engage with in that process. So, and it all came to a head for me in terms of the clarity of my thinking, and this idea that had been started to germinate within me, which was, I was at a party on New Year's Eve in 2019.
As you are.
And we had no idea what was about to hit us, right? Everyone was like, 2020 is going to be amazing. I don't know if you remember the hype.
Mate, 2019, I was in a retreat with a bunch of guys. It was a men's retreat in Manchester, and we were planning for the decade.
Okay.
So we were like talking about what we wanted to do, and people were standing up in that retreat saying, I'm going to be a New York Times bestseller. I was talking about, I'm going to raise this much money. And it was such they were talking about family, whatever. So we really thought we had the decade in sort of in our hands, and we could be whatever we wanted to be. We had no clue.
Yeah.
What was around the corner.
Yeah. Yeah. It was such a profound experience of the limitations of humanity.
Mate.
Gosh, that's another conversation. But
hey there, just want to say thank you for listening or for watching this podcast. We have a great desire to grow this podcast, and one of the ways we're going to do that is if you listening follow, or if you are watching, you subscribe to the podcast. The faster it grows, the more guests we can get, but also the better the podcast gets. So please just do me a favor, hit the subscribe button or the follow button. Back to the episode.
I'm at this party and a friend of mine walks in and we're having a conversation, and she said two things in the time that she was at this party that just catalyzed everything that has happened.
Ooh, I love these moments.
Yeah, it was a road to Damascus moment, right? One of the things she said was, according to Dr. Nassim Nicholas Taleb, who is a Lebanese mathematician.
Yeah. I know.
You might, you probably know him. He says the three most harmful addictions in life are heroin, carbohydrates, and a monthly paycheck. And I was like, wow. Ouch.
You felt seen.
Yeah. No, I not only did I feel seen, I wanted to hide under the table. So I just felt, wow, yeah, that's me, plus, all my peers. The second thing she said to me that was really profound was that there were more food banks than McDonald's in the UK. And somehow in my mind, I put these two things together and I just thought, I cannot continue to stay in a career that doesn't align with my values, no matter how stable it is, because it provides that, monthly income that is not to be sniffed at, right? But I didn't want that comfort to kind of desensitize me and kind of make it okay for me to continue living in a society where there's more food banks than the most popular fast food chain in the world. Because to me, that was, when I heard that, I just thought, what an indictment on our society. But also, I felt slightly ashamed that someone had to tell me that I wasn't aware of that statistic myself, because I was involved in the non-profit world. I was involved in various kind of social change initiatives. And I didn't know that that's where we were at, since the Trussell Trust opened its first food bank in, I think it was 2001. That we're now seeing this scaling of food banks. That's where we're at as a society. And I just thought, okay, I can't. And so shortly before that, I had been working on this. I had been kind of developing this idea of what could it look like to provide alternative wealth advisory services that center redistribution, that create kind of an ecosystem that allows values-led wealth holders to really integrate their values across their wealth stewardship, their business ownership, all areas of influence in their life. And so this had been stirring up within me. And then it was like when I had this experience on New Year's Eve, it was just like, boom, this is it. I have to, there's no turning back,
So did you continue to party, or did you rush out with your bag to run home and start to brainstorm?
I continued to party hard. And then when I got back, before I went back to work, I did a lot of crazy mind mapping. Things kind of developed from there. So
you then handed in your notice?
Not immediately, no. No. So I worked on kind of refining the proposition and my ideas as well. I did a lot of research. I spoke to a lot of wealth holders.
Got it.
Obviously, we went into lockdown in March 2020. Shortly before then, I went down to 4 days a week at my job. So I dropped a day, and partly just because I wanted to be in the real community.
Yeah.
You remember I spent 12 years, living that life in the city, commuting in and out of the city, and your world becomes quite small, actually.
Literally, people you work with, none of people on your team or working on a specific project are the people you talk to every day.
Yeah.
The rest of the conversations are sort of shallow and...
Yeah, I mean, I had a fabulous team, right? They're amazing. I attribute much of my success to them and their ability to create the conditions that that enable me to thrive.
Yeah.
And I had the loveliest team in the firm, and it was a really wonderful experience. And it was still, particularly when you're dealing with wealth every day, your world becomes very, very small. And your reality, your exposure to the world is seen through a particular lens. And it's almost like I just wanted to spend time going into shops, and cafes in my high street to understand like what is life like for people just in the regular community, like in my community. But obviously I ended up having a lot of time on my hands to kind of work on this idea and figure out, okay, what is it that this could look like? What are the values and kind of political, framing that should govern like what I do next? And so it developed quite significantly from there.
So now you're modern day Robin Hood. I'm joking. You're not Robin Hood. But now it's odd. So initially, and I guess this really wasn't what you were doing, but it could be phrased like that. It was like, how do we extract money, if you like, from the proletariat? I'm joking now. How do we take money from the bottom, so to speak, and kind of help it concentrate more at the top? And you've done a 180, and that now your work is about how do we help folks who do have power, resource, whether it's various forms of capital, how do we help them steward it and essentially allow it to not trickle down? I know that's kind of a politicized term, but how do we get that money out of their hands and into the hands of ordinary people, essentially?
Yeah, I mean, we're supporting people to steward their wealth in line with their values, and that's a really interesting process because if you believe in a fair society and you believe that we should all have access to certain public services, we should all be living to a certain standard of living, what does that mean for you in terms of the level of wealth that you have, in terms of how you're engaging with the tax system and whether you're engaging in tax avoidance? And these are the kinds of conversations that we have with our clients, and we unpack these ideas.
I think, and this happened. I mean, we should confess and say that we've had a chat similar to this before when we were going to Exeter. Was it Exeter? Where is it?
Cornwall.
To
the Eden Project.
Not London. Because we were both speaking at this event. And it was interesting because the first thing I thought when you talk about what you do is I thought, there's no way you have any clients.
Yeah.
What kind of rich person or what kind of person who has wealth would willingly be like, how do I like, get rid of this or steward it in a much more like so like how does that work?
It's astonishing actually, because it's funny because people are like, are you solvent? Like, do you but it's really interesting because, and I always said from the beginning, I'm not looking to convert people. You're probably familiar with the bell curve and the law of diffusion of innovation, which says that the first 2.5% of any of the adoption, when it comes to the adoption of any new innovation, the first 2.5% are the innovators, the next 13.5% are the early adopters. So I'm going for those guys. Like, that's who we focus on. So people tend to come to us already with a sense of they have more than they need. They have too much money. And it makes them feel uncomfortable. And actually, sometimes it makes them feel deeply anxious. That they're living out of alignment with their values. Quickly,
are those people who inherited the money or people who actually made it through, business or things like that?
It's a mixture, actually. I think there's probably a slightly higher kind of concentration of people that are inheritors, and invariably people that create wealth have had some help a lot of the time, and so there's maybe the bulk of their wealth was created through entrepreneurship or their professional life, but maybe they had a little bit of help. But I would say there is definitely a bias towards inheritors, but no, certainly there's a growing number of people that have created wealth that simply think that they have too much. They don't need it all, and nor do they want their children to have all of that wealth, and they want not only them and their family to be thriving, they want to share the abundance that they have with society, to build the society that that we all want to live in. And so there's this kind of two-pronged or two-layered approach with our work, which is that we're helping people to sleep at night by living in alignment with their values, but we're also supporting them to make choices around their wealth that change the system, that seek to... So everything that we do is underpinned by this idea of building the new economy.
The good economy sounds obviously great. because the economy, and I think we covered this a few weeks ago, is a lot of things, but essentially it's everyone that sells and buys. That might be the simplest definition you can come up with. And I guess there is this sort of, and I mean, you've had greater proximity to them, but there is this idea that rich people are evil, right? And hence why I think there's a mental block to thinking rich people would willingly want to let go of riches, because it feels like, isn't the whole point of money to accumulate more of it, and isn't money in and of itself sticky, such that the more you have, the more valuable it is, and so people are a bit scared to let go of anything. It took me a real mental it took me a whole train journey to be like, maybe there are people who have conceived of what enough is.
Yeah, or seeking to rather, to understand. The point that you say you make about rich people being, seen as evil, or the maligned in society, I think there's a double-edged. I think there's a kind of, because wealthy people in society are revered as well as.
This is interesting.
There's a really interesting duality there, I think, with. People will listen to what wealthy people have to say.
This is true,
right?
And it had more sort of.
Yeah, I mean, this is the. I don't know if you've come across the patriotic millionaires, which are a group of millionaires and billionaires. It started in the US, but there's now a growing community in the UK. That is essentially an advocacy group of millionaires and billionaires who are campaigning for progressive tax reform. They are raising the profile of the destabilizing effect of inequality on our economy, and they're using their voices to campaign for higher taxes on themselves, which is fascinating in and of itself. But there is definitely a growing sense of critique and scrutiny on wealthy people in society and how wealth is created. And I think a lot of people can, when they hear us talk about, extreme wealth being bad for society, people are so comfortable talking about extreme poverty in this kind of paternalistic, almost neo-colonial way, but nobody wants to talk about extreme wealth, because that's the other side of the coin, right? When we talk about extreme poverty, people that are being extracted from for the benefit of others. I've lost my train of thought, but it was about the way that wealthy individuals are perceived. But people will still, people do listen to, society worships rich people. Look at social media. Look at what folks are aspiring to. Like, look at who are the influencers. They're people that are making a ton of money. And it's not. I think a lot of people feel threatened about the ultimate message that we have around the creation of an economy that serves everyone, not just the 1%. We're not demonizing wealth. We're raising a question about how wealth is created and maintained, because it doesn't happen in a vacuum. Wealth doesn't happen wealth isn't created in a vacuum. If we look at how big corporations make wealth, create wealth for their shareholders, look at how well or not, as the case may be, employees are being paid. Look at how structures are set up in order to divert profits through different jurisdictions to avoid paying fair taxation. It's not difficult to trace kind of where how wealth is being generated and amassed and accumulated.
Well, I've got a series of other questions for you then, I suppose.
Okay. Well, I'm a trained lawyer, so I'm ready for you.
Which is sort of okay. Well, we can. There's two which are related. One is these patriotic millionaires you speak about. I think I've heard of kind of the gift fund and the kind of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Oh, the Giving Pledge and
so on and so forth. Something feels odd about folks who've spent years if we put our Marxist kind of lens on extrapolating value and denigrating the working class, whatever you want to call it, they've gotten super rich, and now I guess maybe to absolve themselves of some guilt, they're now sort of trying to quote unquote change the system that allowed them to get rich. They now want to make it harder for other people to get rich. So it's also a sense of like, hold on a minute. So you're happy, you've made your money, you're super rich, you're giving away some of your money, and now you want to change the system to make it harder for other people to accumulate wealth so they can't be as rich as you. That seems odd.
It's uncomfortable, isn't it? You can feel it. I can feel
fine.
it.
I don't have the millions, so I'm okay.
I feel the discomfort of having spent 10 years helping probably some of these, kind of people of that level of wealth to accumulate more wealth and to avoid taxes. That's part of my story. It's also, part of why I'm able to do this work and, really attempt to change the system, because I have kind of insider knowledge, I suppose. And, I explained earlier about repurposing the tools that I learnt in practice. And so by this, in the same vein, these individuals, yes, they have benefited from the system, and they're holding their hands up to that. They continue to benefit from that system, albeit, they make certain choices within that, whether it's to cap their wealth or redistribute considerable sums of wealth to, ensuring that they're not engaging in tax minimization. And so I think it's a really good example of maybe what's not happening in, or maybe not what's not happening in society, but the ability to exercise that muscle of the yes and of yes, the facts are that they have benefited in extreme form from the current economic system, and they're now critiquing it, a system that they continue to benefit from.
Yeah. We can't take them seriously, surely, if that's the case. If you're still benefiting and you want to essentially erode the benefits I could have as I'm on my way up, sort of building, it just doesn't seem fair.
But I think this is precisely the point, because I think it illustrates how it's the system that is designed to perpetuate their benefits from this of our economic system. It's systemic and structural. It's at a policy level.
Yeah.
Having taxation, low taxes on wealth, that's a political choice. We're living at a time where, I think we're at 40-year high still with, inflation. People can't feed their children. They're having to choose between heating their homes and, feeding themselves. And this government has consistently ignored calls to reform the way our tax system works, because at the moment wealth is significantly undertaxed.
Absolutely.
So I think that while you say you can't take them seriously, they're critiquing the system which continues to ensure that they benefit.
Yeah.
And it's not about saying that we don't want other people to benefit from wealth creation. It's not. It's about saying that we want to make the system fairer for everyone, so that we don't end up having these concentrations of wealth in pockets of society.
I take your point. I think what an ordinary person might say, and I know this because you're the good person to ask this actually, because I tweeted not too long ago the fact that, hey there, just want to say thank you for listening or for watching this podcast. We have a great desire to grow this podcast, and one of the ways we're going to do that is if you listening follow, or if you are watching, you subscribe to the podcast. The faster it grows, the more guests we can get, but also the better the podcast gets. So please just do me a favor, hit the subscribe button or the follow button. Back to the episode. The UK must be one of the worst countries for wealth creation if you start from the bottom, because it's you're taxed in like 12 places, and then they're like, come on, we support the wealth builders, and you go, hold on a minute, you've got a council tax, which I hate. with every fiber in my being. I would like it if there was actually a sense of community in the council, but away from that, council tax, road tax, there's ULEZ has been expanded, there's income tax. Come on, there's more. I'm sure people listening can comment below. There's so much tax just for the ordinary person trying to get by.
100%.
It's too much.
Yeah, and this is one of the points, is that the ordinary people, bear, proportionately, they pay a lot more tax out of their income than, people that maybe, they earn their income from their wealth. Yeah. Right? Rather than
actually doing work.
Exactly. And so the burden of taxation, as it were, falls on ordinary people. And well, that's not fair. Particularly in the context of the last, 30 years or so, where wages have been stagnating in real terms. So I do understand the frustration, particularly, and the point that you make about, you're trying to create wealth from the bottom when you've had nothing. Invariably, many people that have created wealth have had that help because money makes money. Yeah. And that's a result of wealth preservation and accumulation passing down dynastically, or and also appreciate that there is this tension of in many communities, in racialized communities, where people haven't been able to create generational wealth. They're also asking, well, what does this mean for me? Like, I want to create wealth for my family, and it's not about saying that that's wrong at all. It's about trying to build an economic system which minimizes harm to individuals and communities and enables us to generate wealth collectively in a way that ensures kind of shared abundance and prosperity for everyone.
Hey there, just want to say thank you for listening or for watching this podcast. We have a great desire to grow this podcast, and one of the ways we're going to do that is if you listening follow, or if you are watching, you subscribe to the podcast. The faster it grows, the more guests we can get, but also the better the podcast gets. So please just do me a favor, hit the subscribe button or the follow button. Back to the episode. So in your ideal world, if you're, it's always good to ask folks who run, say, non-profits or businesses that have social kind of good at the end of it. What would have to happen for you not to exist? So essentially, what does success look like for you? I hope, you have a kind of a conception of why you wouldn't be needed, because this is one of the ways to almost distrust some charities, that their survival is dependent on the problem being perpetuated, which makes you kind of go, So you want to end world hunger, but really you have no concept of world hunger ended, and so you're just kind of this perpetual whatever. So, which I it's always scary to think about. But I guess for you, what does success look like in your ideal world? Is it a world where there's no billionaires? Is it because another question to add to that one, once you answer that, is it even possible to become a millionaire without exploiting people?
Well, this is a great question. And, this is a great question. And we should have this conversation about, I don't know, there are lots of factors that come into play, like around, it's interesting because we live in London, right? And lots of people are technically millionaires in London because they're sitting on property, because asset prices have increased, skyrocketed in some cases over the last, 20, 30 years because of speculation, and because many wealthy people have been able to accumulate, acquire like property, build up their portfolios. That's, pushed up asset prices. So lots of people are millionaires in London. It's really interesting. But just coming back to your question about what success looks like for us, we're a really odd organization in that, the world of private wealth advisory specifically, is very hidden from kind of mainstream society. So it is, I have this particular set of skills and experience in the private wealth industry that I am leveraging in service of a new economy, essentially. If we exist in our current form, doing the same thing, supporting individuals and families on a, consultancy basis, helping them to set limits on their wealth, helping them to navigate their practices around tax, ensuring that they're in alignment with their values, and pursuing redistribution in a way that is very strategic and that creates to the development of a new economy that is just and fair, then we will have failed. Because the idea is that we're pioneering a different form of wealth advisory practice that ideally will inspire other professionals who are currently in mainstream private wealth industry to adopt the methods and practices that we are pioneering through our practice. And hopefully we will see in the coming years a new generation of wealth advisory firms that are exclusively dedicated to supporting wealthy individuals with supporting the new economy and supporting them around alignment of their wealth stewardship with their values. And our hope is that this does lead to advice that doesn't operate on these two main assumptions: that everybody wants to accumulate as much wealth as possible, regardless of how much they have and regardless of how much they need. And, the second assumption being that everybody wants to minimize as much tax as possible. Ultimately, we don't want to exist. The only reason we do exist is because we've come in to disrupt the private wealth industry, because what we provide doesn't exist, but we hope that we won't have to exist, so that because our practices and our model of advisory service will be replicated by other firms.
So how has your work been received, especially because you're a disruptor?
Sounds very serious. How's your work been received? By whom?
How has it been? Because when you do, you're shedding light on a very sort of private world. I said at the start, a lot of people are like, what's going on? Who? What kind of thing? People don't know this exists. Yeah. But then two, so one, you shining light on it already makes a couple of people uncomfortable. I remember, what was it? I think we were in the House of Lords for one of these meetings about wealth, and there's this man, he came to speak to us all about so he had a Sunday Rich Times list with him, and he was like, here are the top 10 people, and he's like, they're not the richest in the country. And we were like, oh, no way, it's not Richard Branson, what's going on, kind of thing. And he was like, this is declared wealth. These are people who want you to know that they're billionaires or they're millionaires, whatever. He says the kind of clientele he has, who he helps to manage their affairs, will never want you to know that they're rich. Like, they have undeclared wealth, they have wealth held in all sorts of in blind trust and all these kind of interesting sort of ways. So like that, my eyes opened when he was like, this is not the top 10 rich people in the country at all. And so your work of advocacy of just shining light, you're twitching. Is there tell me.
The dark world of blind trusts.
You're like, too much. We must eliminate it.
So amusing.
Anyways, so you shedding light on this is already like a mind, like, for people. Yeah. But I imagine there's people who don't want you to succeed.
Yeah, of course. I mean, it's a very confronting message, isn't it? And it's it's the behaviors around accumulation are shaped by this scarcity mindset and narrative, and the kind of implicit there's an implicit understanding that the purpose of our economy, the way that we have organized ourselves as a society and the way that we organize our resources, over the last 100 years, it's all designed to accumulate wealth for, a certain group of people. And the idea of creating a more, level playing field means that, some people will lose power and control and wealth. And that that's there are people that are willing to do that, to go on that journey themselves, and we're working with those people. But even then it's hard, you're completely having to rewire a mindset that you may have grown up with, or, your peers reinforce every day, but also, it's just the water that we're swimming in. That's just the way things have always been. And, policy reinforces this, and corporate ownership reinforces this. And it's definitely not an easy message to digest. And of course, there are people that are fundamentally ideologically opposed to, some of the values that we espouse as an organization, and some of our analysis around the fact that we live in an extractive, an economy which relies on extraction and exploitation for the purpose of wealth accumulation and concentration, and that economic system is fundamentally, unsustainable.
Yeah.
And we're going to have to transition to another form of economy. And in order to make that transition a just transition, certain things need to happen to get to a regenerative economy that serves everyone and ensures that we're living within planetary boundaries. There's a whole ecological element that we could talk about that I won't go into in detail now, but some people just don't agree with that analysis.
Yeah.
And there are the people that agree that, well, I can continue to accumulate wealth even, through impact investing and
just offset it with sort of good stuff.
Yeah. And there is, in my mind, there's social impact and there's social justice. And the difference between the two is that with social justice, people are prepared to lose and divest themselves of power. And that's not easy. It's really not. And so I think I just concentrate on the people that are, that we're working with, the people that support this message, and at least are prepared to interrogate, because that's how my journey started. It started with me looking at myself and all the things I was doing, all the good I was doing, all my ethical side hustles, and actually looking at myself as an actor in the global economy, like me as a body in the global economy. What is the kind of net impact here?
Yeah.
Someone who is helping the rich get richer, helping them to minimize taxes, and then doing all this good over here. Actually, what's my net contribution to society? And that was really hard for me. And I took a really bold decision to come out of that system and to disrupt and to contribute towards building the new. And I don't know, we have a lot of great supporters, and of course there are people that, are opposed to our work or maybe don't really understand it, and that's fine, because everyone's on a journey of some sort.
No, I mean, I love your personal journey, at least as you've articulated it, because it starts with interrogation, as you said, which is something everyone can do. And it's always important to acknowledge privilege. I know we're privileged in that once you've, as you said, even in your journey, you had to sort of get to a position where you had enough money, perhaps, to be able to look back or drop down a day at work, where a lot of people may be just like, I just need as many hours as possible. And so it means it may not be their time to have that kind of conversation. Yeah. However, putting it, in front of you and at some stage visiting it is empowering, because it comes from an honest space. It doesn't really matter what the reception is like, because it was never a sort of, this is going to be the next big thing. It was never that. It's coming from a much deeper place. I mean, it's Black History Month in America, so I suppose I have to ask you this, which is, some people listening or watching might be like, she's a Black woman navigating these spaces. Is it safe for her? How is she doing it? What kind of experience is she having? Or do you just not really think about?
Well, I think it's a really interesting, political statement in a way that, as a Black female body navigating leadership in this way, in the context of, pursuing a fairer economy, I think is a really interesting political dynamic in and of itself, right? Given the history of extraction that we've seen, and through colonization enslavement and ongoing violence against black bodies around the world, and so I find that really interesting to have stepped into this role. It's a journey, Mike. It's
what does that mean?
It's a journey. I get the support that I need. It was obvious to me from the beginning that it's a huge deal, kind of taking up this space in the world, talking about extreme wealth. Coming from a working class background, being the daughter of Ghanaian migrants, I also had really great training for it because I was in the private wealth industry, which is, I always felt like a bit of an anomaly in the industry. And, I went to events where, let's just say, the people assumed I wasn't supposed to be there. Yeah. Or, they mistook me for someone else that, wasn't a private wealth practitioner. So I'm kind of used to it.
So when you get that, do you just kind of water off a duck's back sort of thing, or how do you? Because I've had that many times as well, events and where folks kind of go, "Are you not meant to be there?" And you're like, "I am." I mean, it happened. Funny enough, when I was working in the House of Parliament for a bit, I worked in the facilities department for a little while, and literally going in was like, I'll always be walking around and someone would be like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, I'm at work, sort of thing, because they just think I've sort of wandered in where I shouldn't be. Yeah. I suppose things are probably better now. So how do you react when that happens?
It's like training a muscle, isn't it? But then at the same time, the muscle memory. When I was a lot younger, I mean, it really affected me, I think, just because it just, every time something like that happened, it made me feel like it was reinforcing a message that, well, you don't belong here, do you? You're not actually meant to be here.
Not from here, are you?
This is not. This ain't your patch. Yeah. It never will be. But so it's been a long, long, long journey of developing confidence in who I am. But there's one thing that trumps everything. Even if something happens that knocks my confidence, or someone says something really inappropriate, the thing that no one can ever take away from me is that I have a vision that is so compelling that it led me to effectively blow up my career. And I have such conviction in the vision and the purpose behind the Good Ancestor Movement, and no one can take that away from me. And that's what gives me confidence and courage, and gives me an enormous sense of empowerment in just standing in who I am and my story and my experiences that have set me up to do this work. And that's what I stand in every day. And I was telling you about the Fight the Power documentary, but that's, you've really got to watch it, because it's all about, how hip hop changed the world. And it's funny because Fight the Power is my song, Fight the Power by Public Enemy. If I know I have to have a difficult meeting with someone, or maybe, before speaking gigs, or, anytime I'm really nervous or I'm doubting myself, I listen to that song, and it reminds me that I'm not alone. Like, I'm part of this continuum of people working in social and economic justice, and freedom fighters, and people fighting against all kinds of systems of oppression that have gone before me. And I'm just part of that continuing kind of cohort of people that are trying to change the system. And it is really hard, but that song really helps.
I love that. I mean, folks should add that to their playlist.
Definitely.
But it's. I'm glad you kind of answered it that way, to be honest, because I think it's so important for people listening and watching to know. I think when people see, and I get this all the time, like, for one, I'm introverted, which is always shocking to people. Like, no way, and it's like, I don't really like people. I just find interactions very draining. Yeah, that's the one. But I think with you, I think when people see competent people, they always assume they're like super confident, type 1, let's get it all the time, not realizing that, you know, trying to systems change can be very bewildering, because as you said, you're both a participant and someone trying to sort of change it. So you've got to on a daily basis almost navigate contributing, but also trying to kind of take back your contribution and you know, and rework it. But then at the same time, it's like when you're an early adopter or an innovator, you are very much in your imagination all the time, because you have to imagine the thing you're building that doesn't exist, and the thing you have currently doesn't always look like the thing you imagine. So you've got to be able to sort of almost like an Old Testament prophet in a way, hold this vision in your head and slowly walk towards it, right? Knowing that, hey, you know, one day I may see something that looks exactly like what I see in my head, but right now we're sort of on the journey there, and that's very disconcerting. It's very difficult. It means you lack confidence. I've literally gone into rooms where they're like, oh my God, and I'm kind of like, you know, because I just don't, I'm like, this is not even what I want yet, you know, but yeah, thanks, you know, sort of thing.
Yeah,
it's hard, isn't it?
It is. It's really hard, and you feel that there's that Old Testament prophet kind of piece really speaks to me. But there's this like tension between having a vision that is so clear, but then having to be prepared to flex and to pivot and to allow it to not be static, to not hold to your vision too tightly, that you become really rigid about the way it's worked out. And yeah, it's really challenging. And, you know, for a long time, I just felt like, gosh, I'm just winging it. You know, you feel like you're winging it. But this is what I'm learning. And particularly as someone who's come from quite a risk-averse background, coming from a risk-averse family, or like having a risk-averse background, and then joining a really risk-averse profession as a lawyer where you're, you know, everything is so fixed. You're like in this fixed mindset, and then it was never in my plan to become an entrepreneur. And then learning that, oh, actually you learn by doing, and you learn by like making mistakes and the things that don't go so well. And it's, you know, it can be such a uncomfortable process, like learning to just live in that permanent state of discomfort, and you're permanently growing. But it's also immensely rewarding. Seeing something that you've created take on a life of its own, and to just have the opportunity to learn and create every day. Yeah. It's a great privilege.
Well, I think you're doing brilliant work. I don't think you need me to say that, but I think you're doing brilliant work. You're in many ways swimming upstream, so naturally the current may be against you, but I think at some stage the current is hopefully aligned, right? And it's kind of like helping you know, achieve even more. I think the work you do is one of the works that kind of has to succeed. You know, I think any systems change, it just can't be from the bottom up. It will take too long. It's hard. It's an undue amount of pressure to put on ordinary people. So you kind of need both extreme ends to play ball, if you like. And I guess, you know, the more you succeed, the more we have people playing ball. Well, I suppose Liz Truss wrote an article not too long ago, literally a few days ago, saying she's coming back. Don't know what that means, but she spoke about how I guess she's trying to position herself as a visionary. You know, we do need tax cuts. We do need to kind of realize the prophetic claim she made in her Britannia Unchained book, that, you know, we need the wealth creators to be set free from taxation so they can create more and they can, you know, and that's sort of what she believes, and really she represents, you know, a much larger group of people. You know, that's what they think will lead the UK into this kind of prosperous post-Brexit world and stuff like that. I guess to wrap this up, what's your sort of response to that mindset that we need a second go at trickle-down economics?
Yeah, I find it really dispiriting hearing about that, and you know, my response would be prosperity for whom? because we know that those policies, they don't change the system. They don't enable everyone to benefit and thrive. They come often at the cost of, you know, a state that's able to provide for everyone fairly, provide the conditions that are required for everyone to flourish. You know, you think about our public services that, you know, nurses are on strike. You know, everyone's on strike. It feels like the whole country's on strike. And I think this idea of, you know, we could have a much longer conversation about it, but at the end of the day, there's no escaping that, you know, wealth is created in a vacuum, and there are implications for ordinary people who don't have good quality work and they don't have good quality pay, and you know, they're not able to benefit from public infrastructure which is really enabling them to thrive in life. And you know, I recognize that, of course we want to be able to position people to create wealth, but you know, the idea that tax cuts, particularly tax cuts on the wealthy, are going to be the perfect panacea to bringing Britain into prosperity, you know, that would be exercising political choices in favour of a very small elite proportion of the population, and would just serve to, you know, continue to increase the already horrendous gap between the rich and poor. And that in itself, you know, wealth inequality at this time, I think, is an existential threat for our society. It is dangerous. You know, it means that we're at risk of ordinary people not being able to spend in the real economy. And once that stops happening, we're toast.
And on that note, thank you again for being part of this conversation. You have to come back. We've got to talk about taxation another time.
I think we've got to break it down,
in good detail.
Yeah.
Because I think we probably even have varying perspectives.
I was going to say, you could invite, you know, we can invite some polarity into the space. Bring in a right-wing think tanker. You know, we can have some really generative discussion.
Let's do it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me.
I want more than just a piece. Wanna be heard from the west to the east. I worked in my craft and I prayed for my time on the scene. The man have never left my team. 19, learned the right creed. Nah, I'm not a right breed, but I might be. In my crease, Nikes, hit up my G. I'll still never sell out my theme. Well, you know about heritage, you go inherited. Don't chill with the snakes, but the flow's still venomous. Perspective is everything, so much lemonade, I don't know what a lemon is.